Tonight, it seems fitting that this event takes place in this site, for it was here over 3 decades ago, in what was then the Harvey Gallery, that I will regularly meet Dick and benefit from his precious insights and input, actually, after I committed myself to assembling a collection of the Something Else Press output. I also mentioned last night that I conceived this project from the standpoint of an artist. This collection, held here at the Emily Harvey Foundation, is one of the most complete in existence. 2 years ago, while working in the Foundation archive with Alice, we began looking at this exceptional material in a new way, pondering whether how this one could cast it in the form of an exhibition. In the process of our research, from the Getty to the Zoom archive in Stuttgart and elsewhere, as so many new details came to light, it became clear to us that this little-known material constituted a rich framework for new scholarship, and that this might be initiated by triggering a conversation as multifaceted as its historical object, a concept-driven symposium which will help amplify all the material we have assembled. We envisage this conference to function as a kind of think tank that will address the challenges of realizing an exhibition built around the output and the activities of the Something Else Press and of the lesser-known Something Else Gallery. Our hope is that the 4 panels of the conference will generate many unforeseen insights and perspectives which will widen the breadth of our project. We are utterly thrilled and deeply grateful to our distinguished speakers for accepting our invitation to share with us their thought and work and help us take further the record of the press. This conference is dedicated to Dick Higgins. It was made possible thanks to the generous funding from the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts and the full support from the Emily Harvey Foundation Board. We also like to thank the Knowles Higgins family for all their help and also advice, Jessica, Hannah, and of course Alison, who's present with us here. I will now defer to Alice, who will draw a brief historical background of the press and introduce the speaker of today's panel. Before I do, I must inform you, sadly, that for those of you who were not here last night, that an unexpected health incident prevented Benjamin Duclos from delivering his paper today, as he so wanted to do, as he very much wanted to do. So I do want still to thank Benjamin for the exchanges we've had to date, and also for his conversation with Julia Robinson, who's going to be moderating the panel regarding his abstract and the panel at large. We are very much thankful again to Hannah Higgins, who accepted to fill in for Benjamin with hardly any notice and to present a recent paper she recently wrote on Intermedia, a paper never published before. As there is a final note, actually, this is like on the trivial side, but I have to tell you, I have to communicate this with you. We have been notified only yesterday that the Department of Environmental Protection of the City of New York, from them, that the water supply for the whole building has been cut out from 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock, which happens to be the time we are here. So there is some technical aspect to that. Besides, we have a lot of water. Now, as far as bathroom is concerned, I'm sorry about that, but there is a bathtub without instruction from this very department, that there is a bathtub filled in the bathroom with a bucket, and I hope that all of you know what to do. So, in case of emergency, that's it. So, thank you very much, and Alice.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alice Sentimore. I would like to join Christian in welcoming back all of you to the second day of this conference dedicated to Dick Higgins' Something Else Press. I apologize if this will sound a bit redundant for those who were here last night. Before we begin today's discussion, I would like to provide some brief background on the press. Emerging from a period of far-reaching experimentation at the most intense and hectic moment of a new collective art movement, which had just arrived in New York, namely Fluxus, the Something Else Press was launched by an artist acting as publisher. It operated between 1963 and 1974, in New York for its first 7 years, for a brief stint in California, and finally in Vermont. In only a decade, it published 49 books, establishing a wave of American reception for the new diverse artistic tendencies of the 1960s, such as new music, fluxus, concrete and sound poetry, simultaneities, and other innovative forms of writing, intertextuality, and performance that still resist labels and categorizations. Just as importantly, the press took the initiative to publish landmarks of the historical avant-garde, including Luigi Russolo's 1913 manifesto L'arte dei rumori, The Art of Noises, Richard Holzenbeck's 1920 Dada Almanac, many scarcely available writings by Gertrude Stein, and John Cage's mentor, Henry Cowell's early 20th century world music. By combining the wisdom of great New York publishers and the new instincts and impetus around Fluxus, the output of the press represents an extraordinary map of the 20th century. In a decade of diverse exploratory publishing efforts, from Fluxus to conceptual art, how to interpret Higgins' dual commitment, on the one hand, to reach the widest possible audience, and on the other, the highest publication standards, evinced in the stunning quality of the book objects. It seems that the latter acted as a kind of Trojan horse to broaden the interest in underknown or new and often cryptic verbal visual manifestations. The conventional frame of the book, in other words, supported the radical and ephemeral content. As a counterpart to the impeccably made books, the press released a series of booklets called the Great Bear Pamphlets. Through the strategy of alternating a pricey publication with an inexpensive pamphlet, Higgins achieved his dream of having avant-garde documents available in grocery stores. In addition, the press had a space for shows and performance, the Something Else Gallery, which was intermittently active between 1966 and 1972. Higgins made it a priority to extend the influence and distribution channels of his press by connecting with Europe, Canada, Mexico, and South America, creating a network for communication and dialogue on book publishing ideas. In so doing, his press became a global entity, introducing many foreign publications and artists in the United States and vice versa. As Christian has already mentioned, our larger aim is to cast this work into the form of an exhibition, as the vision of one artist channeling and radiating those of many. Higgins was in the front row as a witness and participant of so much that had happened. He was also one of the most erudite artists of this period. And yet, committed and political as he was, he could hardly have imagined the extent to which his utopian effort would have escalated in importance. For us, simply mapping out the archive of this enterprise would be relatively easy. Doing justice to the complexity in the exhibition now seems utterly essential. To this end, we have envisioned these symposia to gather some of the most knowledgeable people in the field and invite them to think together to explore new possibilities for the development of our project. Driven by the burgeoning scope of Intermedia, then and now, we have provisionally parsed this effort at collective thought in 4 perspectives: historical, academic, curatorial, and publishing. Last night, for the panel titled The Something Else Factor, we heard from those close to the press in its time. Today's panel, Something About Intermedia, will address Higgins' concept of intermedia, which he took as the subject of a lecture in 1963-64 and recast in essay form to publish the first Something Else Press newsletter in 1966. At that time, he defined intermedia as an artwork or conceptual formulation that exceeded the limits of any one medium and indeed resisted categorization. The discussions will ideally help us to consider the relevance of Higgins' mid-1960s model in relation to contemporary practices. Tomorrow, the speakers engage in hybrid scholarly and curatorial practices grounded in the possibilities of the archive will explore methods of treating and exhibiting immaterial forms of art, examining how past shows and historical accounts of radical publishing projects have impacted and implicated artists. The panelists will reflect on how exhibition approaches have been adapted to accommodate the needs of the book format. Finally, on Sunday, a group of publishers known for their treatments of book as art will cast their historical consideration on the founding principles of the Something Else in light of the currently operating initiatives of their contemporary presses. This program of events represents the first major phase of consolidation of the collecting, preservation, and presentation efforts of one of the most thought-provoking projects of the 1960s. Thanks to the speakers who have generously accepted to participate, representing diverse positions that have motivated the practices and the intellectual commitments in the fields of art and beyond, we hope this conference will ground the Something Else Press's foundational role. As we must inevitably take up the challenging of positioning the press from the perspective of now, we are excited to ponder initiatives focusing the linguistic, the relational, the intangible, and the ephemeral, as a means of knowing this fugitive historical object. For the sake of time, I will read an abridged version of today's panelist bios. For more information, we invite you to consult the program. Blom is a professor at the Department of Philosophy, Classics, History of Art, and Ideas at the University of Oslo, and Weigeland Visiting Professor in the Department of Art History, University of Chicago. Her field of specialty is modernism, avant-garde studies, and contemporary art, technology, and media. Recent books include The Autobiography of Video, The Life and Times of a Memory Technology, New York, Sternberg Press, 2016, and On This Style Site, Art, Sociality, and Media Culture, New York, also Sternberg Press, 2007 and 2009. Harvey Higgins is professor and founding director of the Interdisciplinary Bachelor of Arts and Ideas at the School of Art History at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Her interest in the socially situated nature of sensory experience has led to two streams of research. One examines how fluxes, happenings, and other artists active since the 1960s have pushed back against the predominantly visual paradigm of the arts. The other looks at the deep history of sensory organization as grids in European and American cultures. Higgins' books include Fluxus Experience, University of California Press 2002, The Grid Book, MIT Press 2009, and the anthology Mainframe Experimentalism, Early Computing and the Foundations of Digital Art, University of California Press 2012, which she co-edited with media historian Douglas Kahn. The daughter of Fluxus artists Dick Higgins and Alison Knowles, she's co-executor of the estate of Dick Higgins and his Something Else Press. Joan Retallack is author of Music Cage, John Cage in Conversation with John Retallack, Gertrude Stein, Selections and the Poetical Wager, as well as many volumes of poetry, including Procedural Elegies, Western Civ Continued, which was an Art Forum Best Book of 2010. In 2014, she organized the Symposium, Thought Experiments and Poetical Wagers in Difficult Times at MoMA, and launched The Aftermath in a 2008 media event at the Kitchen, New York. Retallack has been performer and/or dramaturg for a number of Cage and Stein concerts and productions. Most recently, Cage's 45 for a Speaker with sole percussion, and Hudson Hall's 2017 The Mother of Us All, Stein libretto, Virgil Thompson score. She's currently finishing a book of essays and poems positioned as interlocutors in reciprocal alterity. John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur, Professor Emerita of Humanities and Senior Associate of the Institute for Writing and Thinking at Bard College, she lives in the Hudson Valley. Finally, our moderator, Julia Robinson, curator and art historian, is Associate Professor in the Department of Art History at New York University. Her exhibitions include George Brecht Events, A Heterospective, Museum Ludwig, Cologne, 2005, The Anarchy of Silence, John Cage and Experimental Art, MACBA, Barcelona, 2009, New Realisms, 1957-1963, Object Strategies Between Ready-Made and Spectacle, Museo Nacional Centro de Arte Reina Sofía in Madrid, 2010, and Plus or Minus 1961, Founding the Expanded Arts. Reina Sofía 2013, which she co-curated with Christian Zatra. Her research has been published in journals such as Performance Research, October, Grey Room, Moose, and Art Forum. Recent essays include From Snapshots to Physical Things, in Judson Dance Theater, The Work Is Never Done, New York, MoMA 2018, and Performance, Performativity, and Participation, Toward a Genealogy of Applied Art, in Reclaiming Art, Reshaping Democracies, La Presse du Réel 2017. She's editor of the October Files volume, John Cage, and has a monograph on George Brecht forthcoming under the same imprint. Thank you all. Without further ado, Julia Robinson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Is it working? Yep. Okay. Thank you all for being here, and I second and third Christian and Alice's thanks to our speakers. So our panel today, Something About Intermedia, seeks to unpack this remarkable term, coined and developed by Higgins between 63 and 65, and published in the first issue of the Something Else Press newsletter in February 1966. In that landmark text, Higgins questioned the view that art belongs to one or another form, as unnecessary. Paintings, what are they? Higgins asked. Expensive, handmade objects intended to ornament the walls of the rich, or assume a grandeur in public institutions. These situations, he insisted, do not allow any sense of a dialogue. So dialogue, in fact, like intermedia, is a word that takes on many dimensions in the period under discussion. Through the lecture and/or performance context, the sharing of scores, the planning and programming of artists with related interests into the space of a calendar, and ultimately the space of performance, or performance series as festivals. Dialogue in the broader sense and social sense is so tied to all that we're considering that it might even be called a subtext of intermedia. And I think that will come out in the unexpected communication between the papers that we have this afternoon. Ina Blom will be taking Ray Johnson's book, The Paper Snake, one of the earliest Something Else Press publications, as a point of departure to probe what she calls the particular sociability operative in Johnson's practice. That is, rather than forging the social links one would expect through the network structure of his mail art, Blom is persuaded that it undoes them. We might best recall Johnson's own idiosyncratic tweak to the title most associated with him, New York Correspondence School. He replaced the D-E-N-C-E of correspondence with dance. The allusion to movement between pairs or larger groups of people, dance, is obviously not coincidental, for it was always a dance between Johnson and his interlocutors. This, as Blom seems to want to argue, is in turn a productive way to think about intermedia. Hannah Higgins' paper dovetails with and diverges from Blom's in interesting ways, I think. And I imagine that there'll be quite a generative dialogue coming out there, dialogue pun, and also between us and all of you. Just as Blom has been thinking about sociality from technique to the technical and the technological for quite some years now, across several remarkable books and articles, so Higgins has addressed the experiential, and intersubjective engagement, such as that which courses through fluxus, and structures that cross time, like the fundamental one of the grid, but become new matrices, supports, catalysts each time. Today, Higgins looks at a strikingly informal mapping of activity, departing from Charlotte Morman's notes for her avant-garde festivals. This suggests what I think is a fascinating tentative and temporary device for uniting disparate figures, namely the grid of the calendar, amplified by how its numbered frames are populated. Joan Retallack widens the frame of intersubjective structure and the structure of language, functionally and via modalities of time, with what she calls a present always already mutated by the contemporary that complicates the past, and an aesthetic enterprise, the aesthetic enterprise, which thrives in a future contingent. I suggested to the speakers that we might come together after the papers through the title and thrust of our panel, Intermedia, with Higgins' both his term and his original text. Perhaps most striking of all is that how this term hasn't dated. It still means something for us today, Intermedia, in a way that many terms of the 60s don't really. And it's still in use. And this is probably all the more reason to clarify the historical specificity of what Higgins meant by intermedia when he brought that term to the fore. In a 1993 interview between Higgins and Christian Zartre, Higgins was quite modest. He said, "The idea was in the air by then, and if I hadn't used the word intermedia, someone else would have." Interestingly, he added a qualifier, a kind of dating, saying that when he first thought about intermedia, which was in 58 to 60, it was still definitely in the future. So we're only talking about a matter of a few years. So just by way of a bit of an introduction, because, well, the other panels have had one more speaker, and also we're missing Benjamin, not that I dare replace him or even try to say too much about his subject, but I hope he'll be an interlocutor with us and with Christian and Alice as they continue the work on the exhibition. So I wanted to sort of prime us on some possible connections between the three papers you're about to hear, to sketch out a possible field of considerations, and to describe a possible historical arc for the interventions and confluences Higgins brought into sudden coherence with that word. So now I'm going to sort of just chat more rather than read at you, but I think Joan's going to touch a little bit on the lecture on nothing. Cage gave, as most of you here will know, a lecture in 1950 in New York called The Lecture on Nothing. As I've come to think about it lately, I'm sort of been struck by the fact that he used as his basis, or the kind of catalytic idea, a lecture that he discovered in the context of the Dada Painters and Poets book that was being prepared at the time, as he was sort of in dialogue with Robert Motherwell, and that was Tristan Tzara's lecture on Dada, where he starts the lecture saying Dada is nothing. And no one's really said this because Cage is so marvellous about covering his tracks. And interestingly, there are aspects of this lecture where he does say things that Tzara said. So Tzara said that all you bourgeois are concerned with your own possessions, owning a home, things like that. And Cage says, and this is sort of the point I want to raise, he says our poetry today is that we possess nothing. If we think we own it, it's sort of dead and there's no way to pursue it, right? So this unleashes a whole possibility of appropriation, including Cage's appropriation of Dada and Cage's self-cannibalisation, appropriating this lecture for several other lectures he did later. So he continued to use things he'd previously written in this sort of collage-like model that is so, it sort of is taken from Dada and used in what I would say is an intermedia way. So in a sense, the term intermedia is illuminated by collage that can actually just be like someone standing in the front of the room using the real time to bring in all kinds of other things. It doesn't necessarily have to be material. And secondly, poetry. So why is a composer standing up in the front of a room, actually in the Artists Club in New York, so speaking to a room full of artists and saying my definition of poetry is this, right? So it's already sort of cancelling disciplinary distinctions. So this is, it's very hard to see on this wall, but just sort of the last segment of the text is where he says, our poetry today is, or now, is the realisation that we possess now. Interestingly enough, I think another Dada reference is, we need not destroy the past, it is gone. Right? So the catchphrase of Dada in its reception was destruction. So in a way, Cage is wiping the slate clean for the next generation. The two issues I want to bring out of this precedent are the first, poetry, which he says some people call content, some people call form, so he's totally scrambling the codes of what poetry is. And secondly, continuity. Continuity at this time was time. Just space and time and a temporal continuum. So Cage here seems to take a Duchampian reference. I wish I had a pointer. But about 3/4 of the way down here he says a piece of string or a sunset, they both fall into this continuity essentially. So you can grab anything, material, immaterial, temporal, all of that, and it's just the time and the structure of time that allows you to drop it in. This is the same lecture which he says it's like an empty glass into which anything can be poured, right, the structure. So this gave a lot of possibilities to all the artists who were coming later, who didn't need to know how to write music, and they could just learn this structure. And I think without structure, Intermedia would just be kind of floating in the atmosphere, right? It's only the structure that was given to it that allows us to see it and read it and compare it to other things today. So that was just a little bit of a guess. And also, a piece of string, it's one wonders which string he was thinking of, but there's a few possibilities in Duchamp. And then, Cage breaks the grand staff notation line and comes up with another line. And actually, Ina has done, in a recent article that she wrote for Critical Inquiry called And Follow It, Straight Lines and Infrastructural Sensibilities, picks up on this idea of a line and how it changes in this moment. So I thought we'd sort of think about a few lines just to start. And so then Joan is also going to speak about 45 for a speaker. This is a lecture that came in 1954, and Cage builds in a few things to this, just briefly. He has instructions to himself like lean on elbow, cough, drink water, so he's doing all these sort of separate things, scripted into the lecture, changing what it means to give a lecture. And at the same time, interestingly enough, I think I've just sort of recently been thinking about this, that he goes over his definition of poetry, but he also right at the bottom here, speaks about a straight line, and I have a feeling that Lot Young's straight line might have come from that somehow, because Young then puts together this publication and anthology, and he publishes that very lecture 45 for a speaker. Much just a little excerpt, but he had it in his hands. And then, of course, Young does the famous piece that gets taken into Fluxus, draw a straight line and follow it. It's actually composition 1969-10 more probably. Anyway, so we will think about how the line from music to gun with the chalk on the stage to, you know, linear networks in Ray Johnson's work might all come together as a matrix of intermedia. I guess I was sort of featuring this page just to show you all the possibilities for a pre-intermedia. You know, so there's like 20 different types of work being done. And in his book, the first book on the Something Else Press, Peter Frank actually draws a line, links an anthology which Petrunas designed and took the contents and began to make Fluxus with it, linked an anthology to Fluxus to the Something Else Press. So, another possibility for the Nothing, Ray Johnson's Nothings, and I'm going to sort of cut this short, I think. There's things we can talk about later. I wanted to just say one thing about the structure of the calendar. There's a way that artists with sort of very disparate sensibilities in this period, in the 60s, came together to perform and do things was by just having a calendar and saying, when do you want to perform, what do you want to do? At least this was definitely the basis of the YAM Festival, organised by George Brett and Robert Watts. And so you see it's got all the days of the calendar, and it's got people who are absolutely not Fluxus. It's before Fluxus comes to New York, so you've got Yvonne Rainer, Robert Morris, all these people who have not got anything to do with Fluxus, but somehow the calendar held them all together. And the word festival is kind of interesting too. So Fluxus calls itself a festival when it begins, and Charlotte Morman uses the word festival when she starts this New York avant-garde of it. So the festival kind of gives all this disparate activity something to make it coherent. Of course, Petrunas was known for his extraordinary calendars and kind of obsessive organisation by just this kind of sort of tendentious premise of the grid of dates. And I guess, well, this is just an idea that there are several perspectives on the very same moment. There aren't a lot of books that are direct witnesses to the early 60s, but you would have to say Higgins's Post-Haste, Jefferson's Birthday, The Primer for Happenings, and Alan Capro's book, which are all out by 66. And they're all sort of claimed to be written in the middle of things as a kind of direct witness. I think we're going to leave it there. Yeah, I'll leave it there and hand it over to Ina in the Blom. Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for this wonderful invitation. I'm really, really happy to be able to participate in this discussion. And particularly since in 1995, I tried and I think failed to make an exhibition, a sort of retrospective of Dick Higgins' work. It was a wonderful collaboration, and I'm eternally grateful to Dick Higgins, everything I learned from him and his generosity to me, etc. And it was really, to me, a struggle to find a way to account for the essence of his activity. So exhibiting him wasn't really books. How could I account for his performances? What to do with the objects? It was, I think, a mess. Actually a mess. But it was an attempt, and it had me thinking, and I'm so grateful that there is no sustained work based on, I think, what is his most compelling this wonderful publication venture as a point of the project, as a lens to see this fantastic person and who's actually a network and so on. So yeah, I couldn't be more happy to be here, I have to say. So in 1965, David? In 1964, Higgins published The Paper Snake, a book that, according to his author, Ray Johnson, assembled all my writings, rubbings, plays, things that I had mailed to him or brought to him in cardboard boxes, or showed under his door, or left in the sink, or whatever, over a period of years. At the time, Ray Johnson had already had several exhibitions of his collage-oriented works, but this book was actually the first exhibit of the activity of mailing, correspondence, or postal networking that underpinned a quite idiosyncratic understanding of collage. One that I think is closer to the sort of temporalizing video thinking or video philosophy that you would find in the work of Andrew Pike, rather than the work of Kurt Schwitters, for instance. And I just remember this interview with Ray Johnson where he's asked about Schwitters and he just refuses to answer. He just deflects his answering with all sorts of other things. I don't know why, but I'm taking that as a familiar. And I know he was very close to Andrew Pike, but that's another story. So, if I have to speak, or if I've chosen to speak on the topic of Ray Johnson today, it's not just to celebrate Stick's early appreciation of Johnson's work, which I think is also an amazing sign of his receptiveness. What concerns me is this: how the basic yet quite peculiar sociability that seems really central to Ray Johnson's practice intersects with what I see as a key aesthetic impulse underpinning Higgins' concept of intermedia. So, my interest in this topic is not simply historical. It springs out of a long-standing interest in the contentious debates on so-called social or relational art practices that often cite the historical example of fluxus and fluxus-related activities. Now, there's obviously no time here to go into all those complex ontological and political and ethical aesthetic topics that inform all of these debates around this issue. So, I just want to point out that raising the social to a principle in a true art practice may be seen, I think, among other things, as an effect of two phenomena. On the one hand, the increasing cultural impact of sociology, and particularly sociological reflexivity, and also, on the other hand, the increase in social connectivity and social connectivity across distance that happens through or thanks to new network technologies in the 20th century, and particularly, of course, after 1960. So the question then is the following: through what media or forms is the social or the so-called social produced in so-called social art practices? And this is where I think it's worth paying attention to Ray Johnson's wayward and quite idiosyncratic approach to the affective, if you want, or utopian aspects of community formation that came to inform numerous art projects in the 1960s and beyond. Now, the Paper Snake documents an activity that had been going on for some time. By the late 1950s, Johnson was busy sending things through the mail to a list of some 200 recipients. And this is what he called his New York correspondence school. And in October 1958, he received one of the probably very many answers. In this case, a very effusive thank you letter from a scholar of French literature called F.C. St. Aubin. Now, there is no record of what kind of work St. Aubin had received. So all we know is that he treats this gift. You can see his letter here. You can't really read it, but I'll take you through the basic ideas. he's treating the work he has received with all the special reverence that's due a work of art. And I think we can say that a work of art belongs to that particular type of gift that can be categorized as invaluable, meaning that its value is in principle not supposed to be measured in strictly economic terms. I mean, the way you would measure the gift of, let's say, a box of chocolates against the gift of a bottle of champagne, say. So works of art are supposedly exempt from the ordinary forms of economic speculation that always threaten to turn gift giving into a simply more dignified and symbol-enhanced form of trade. So a work of art could then perhaps be called the essential gift, at least from an anthropological perspective, which pays attention to the way in which, in every known culture, the gift must always appear to exceed the immediate economic framework. It must not be trade in any way. It must not be confused with trade. At the same time, as of course, every gift also establishes obligations of debt or credit, etc., which serve to reinforce or redistribute the power relations in that particular economy. So if Julia gives a book to me, say, I will feel that, oh, I have to give Julia something back. But not right now, because that will seem mercenary, but, you know, in a little while. So, St-Aubin, in that case, seems fully aware of the invaluable nature of the gift he has received. And because of this gift, he feels that a deep relation has been forged between him and Johnson. And the letter is an effort to confirm this in, again, very effusive terms. And there's, of course, nothing extraordinary about this. I mean, this is just normal etiquette. What is extraordinary is Ray Johnson's response to this letter, which on the face of it seems arrogant, really to the point of hostility. In fact, Johnson's response is nothing less than a dismissal of the entire idea that the gift has been given. And this dismissal has nothing to do with the etiquette of giving, which demands that, you know, you always underplay the value of what you've been giving. So Julia gives something to me and I say, oh, you shouldn't have. She says, that's not right. It's not like that at all. I mean, writing between the lines of this letter, because Johnson's writing in a different handwriting between the lines here. Johnson systematically pinches and probes every single element in St. Aubin's letter that support the very logic of the gift. That is, the notion that one person can in fact give something to another person. And moreover, this overwritten letter is not returned to St. Aubin. It's distributed to a third party, his close friend William S. Wilson, who, among other things, helped him establish his mail-order network. Now, Ray Johnson called this act a collage analysis. It's one of the other comments that appear on this page. And it does not imply any kind of personal animosity between Johnson and St. Aubin. So if Johnson cuts short the relation between giver and recipient, if he somehow interrupts the very ground of the gift logic that supplants St. Aubin's letter, this affects in quite fundamental ways Johnson's own artistic practice of giving, developed in the most literal sense of the word through the medium of the postal system, with its limitless network of givers, senders, and receivers, addresses. So, for this reason, it will necessarily also affect the ideals of ritual generosity, interactivity, and participation that would underpin what was later called correspondence art or mail art, the large network that developed, among other things, out of Ray Johnson's practice, but that I think was not necessarily accepted the same as Johnson's practice. Now, the ideals of this network were explicitly formulated in an ethical code that advocated the idea of free give, absence of competition, and absence of judgment, and the idea of endless acceptance. So, in a sense, ultimately extending the power of the giver, that's the idea of giving the ultimate gifts of art, to each and everyone without exception. So this idea, or this attempt to democratize the ability to give invaluable art gifts, if you want, could perhaps only be imagined on a large scale by means of a system which is proper to modern democracy and which, for the first time in history, as media scholar Bernard Siegel has pointed out, shapes all of its subjects into individuals which are at once both senders, that is givers, writers, artists, and adversaries, that is recipients or readers. Yet already at the point of establishing his postal network, Johnson appears to undo the logic and ethics of community and communicability. In a gesture reminiscent of Jacques Derrida's much later critique of how unexamined notions of presence and co-presence in anthropologist Marcel Mauss's theory of the gift, how this produces society itself as something simply given, something we can take for granted, something that's simply there. Johnson problematizes the very moment of giving in this quite amazing quote, again, written on this little letter. He says, and this is to Bill Wilson, he says this, Bill, there is that moment in giving. It has nothing to do with what or how, to whom or why. It is the same as any other moment. Since it does not exist, it escapes and is not seen. We contain it by description, actions, realizations. Right. And ultimately, it is this potential lack of meaning of the moment in giving, a moment which, in Johnson's words, either does not exist or is just like any other moment. It's this that pulls the ground away from under any kind of easy assertions that Ray Johnson had in fact given an art gift to another person who had received it, so that the social bond, a new link in a larger network, had in fact been created between them. The postal system, which provides the time delays necessary to make responses appear as gifts rather than as kind of blunt tit-for-tat exchange, seems to presuppose the never-ending presence of a community that never fails to stay connected in a continual communion above and beyond all forms of antagonism or difficulty or nothingness, if you want. So to point, as Ray Johnson does, to lack of reality in the moment in giving, is then to point not just to the losses and dispersals that inevitably threatens to such a system. It is also, and more significantly, to point to the postal as just a specific historical configuration, a kind of epistemic modality in which art is above all seen as a guarantor of the communication of meaning from one soul to another. And it's this very idea that is challenged in modern collage practices, the fragmentation, the discourse, etc. But Ray Johnson's mail art is not just a marker of the end of the epoch of the postal or the epistemic configuration of the postal, or something like that. By reconceiving the postal system as a gift system and examining the temporal underpinnings of its infrastructure. He raises the form of its sociability to a principle. So the question is, what is in fact our image or conception of the social? And from the perspective of Ray Johnson's postal system, all we see is nothing but a movement of dispersal that I think at least resonates with key issues at work in Higgins's formulation of Intermedia and the practices it pointed to. Now, in my view, Higgins's Intermedia essay, as brilliant as it is best read in close conjunction with other key something else press missives from the time, notably Games of Art, Intending, and Boredom and Danger. And what comes across in this ensemble of texts is a consistent promotion of the radically generative potential of blankness, nothingness, disappearance, a sort of antidote to the various regulatory technicities in advanced music and art at the time, including the form of indeterminacy promoted by his teacher, John Cage. I think it's particularly impressive, this resistance to aspects of Cage elements. Now, Higgins felt that the interesting dimension of risk implicit in musical indeterminacy was hampered by the problem of relating chance operations to specific sonic materials. He thought that this would necessarily lead to a relatively technical focus on detail and particularity, whether in the hands of the composer or the performer. So Higgins' concept of intending, not to be confused with authorial intentionality, suggested something different. The merest indication of an intention or a direction without specification as to materials or media. And in a particularly interesting move, Higgins associated danger with an idea of boredom that really displaces the familiar modern concept of spleen. I mean, the emphasis on simply feeling bored, feeling the lack of reality. So, as outlined in his personal note for his 1960 play, St. Joan and Blom, boredom in the ordinary sense of the term, which is a natural response to the radically static nature of his trance-based play, was just a step on the way to something more interesting, notably something that Higgins called super boredom. At this stage, when you reach super boredom, you would, as an onlooker or a participant, ideally just disappear into the piece. You would stop to see yourself. You would start to see events as events. Quantities would become relative and not mimetical, as it were. So for Higgins, boredom and danger are essentially features of a sort of immanent self-dispersal at a distinctly non-psychological level. And it's also a strategy that undoes, and I think this is very important, any focus on the channeling or forming or framing or formatting devices that we call media. While vestiges of the concept of media survive in some of Higgins' own formulations of intermedia, the idea of operating between media, etc., the wider discursive context of his intermedia essay points, I think, in a somewhat different and I think more interesting direction, actually. And this is why I think we should pay close attention to Higgins' early appreciation, and I think quite deep appreciation, of an artist who thought of a social phenomenon like the postal system, not as a medium and not as a form, but as the temporalizing infrastructure of the gift system, and the gift itself as a sort of lost or uncontainable time. Now, to wit, we have Ray Johnson's 1962 gift to La Montillon, which is a mailed big box filled with packages And each of these packages contain dated envelopes, a number of dates, months after month, and each envelope contains just loose collage fragments. So this is nothing but a gift of time or a gift of time dispersal. So what I want to suggest here is that Higgins' Intermedia should be related to what I see as a distinct infrastructural sensibility in the early Fluxus environment. At least if we follow Susan Starr and her Bruder's emphasis on the relational temporalities of infrastructures. The idea of paying attention to an infrastructural when, rather than analysis of discrete and transparent technical substrates. But this is a bit theoretical, we'll get back to this in the discussion, etc. But I think it's quite important for the idea of the infrastructural when, the moment of infrastructural operation, rather than what is infrastructure. And this is quite, I think, beautifully captured by Laurent Berland in some recent writings, where she has defined infrastructure as that which binds us to the world in movement and keeps the world practically bound to itself. In contrast to the idea of structure, which merely organizes transformation. Anyway, I think that this focus resonates with recent propositions, among other things presented by Tiziana Terranova and Luciana Parisi, that late 20th century culture itself has become somehow topological, a topological continuity. An order in which change is no longer something exceptional or externally produced, something coming from the outside to disrupt something to stable order, but is something constant, normal, and immanent. And I think this was an emergent change in cultural sensibility that artists like Ray Johnson and Higgins were picking up on at a very early stage. Because I think there must be some reason why so many of the ephemeral, changing, disappearing, barely there Fluxus works emphasize over and over and over again the continuities of change, or the change of continuities. So thank you very much.
Sometimes the grain of sand that lets us see the world in it is, so to speak, something else. Like the casual naming of the something else press, or the other casual, even off-the-cuff ways big things sometimes start. This small scrap of paper, scarcely more than a doodle, speaks volumes about emerging artistic sensibilities in New York in the 1960s. It was scribbled out by the festival organizer Charlotte Norman as she began assembling her very first avant-garde festival of new music in 1963. Across the top, it lists a stunning range of avant-garde and experimental composers. Down the right side, we see the mechanics of public relations linking newspapers to the ideas of premieres. Down the left side, she wrote in the logistics of instrument metal and the material needs of performers. And in the sort of center, one last composer appears, overwritten, as if she returned to the name more than once, and over time in pencil and ink. Cage appears, with the title of this first series, 6 Concerts, 63, given plenty of space to breathe. I can imagine Mormon writing and overwriting Cage as she undertook tasks for the concert. Maybe she was on the phone or drinking coffee, offhandedly marking and remarking the tiny slip while thinking and not thinking. As diagrammed here, Cage is in the center, a dominant node of this particular system of activity. Mormon's network, as we see it here, is typical of artist networks generally. Artists almost never operate in isolation. For this first festival, and the decades of subsequent festivals, Charlotte Mormon used her considerable charm and intelligence to attract PR, as well as the hardware, the instruments, pianos, technology, needed for the composers and artists who contributed to her festivals. I love that she imagined them all in white coats, like scientists or technicians or maybe waiters. The important thing is that they were not the black coats of symphonies. The final program, The final program for that first festival reads like a who's who list of progressive music, jazz music, electronic music, tape music, experimental music, and even event-based performance. The logistical arrangements that were critical to the event's success, as mapped out on the scrap, have been understandably omitted. Or put differently, one could say that the festival program effectively conceals the non-musical labor that made the event possible. In his book, Dark Matter, the artist-writer Greg Cholette describes that, quote, the majority of artists are dark matter, a non-reflective but structurally necessary aggregate of creativity that secretly stabilizes the art world's symbolic and financial economy. He is describing the shadow world of lesser-known artists, small galleries, teachers in the arts, anonymous assistants, museum workers, publishers, non-famous critics, art historians, and friends of artists that make the art market hum by shining light on the greats. One way to see the difference between the scrap and the program in terms of music would be to see it as a necessary step in reproducing the mechanics of fame and fortune that fuel the art world, or in this case, the musical world. Following Cholette, each of these compositional forms introduced to the musical avant-garde created capacities imported from elsewhere. These musical forms were possible because of the ways the composers used their non-musician networks of visual artists, technicians, scientists, writers, and performers to innovate musically. The program depicts, in summary form, the network of networks that made compositional innovation possible at the time. Cage's music had a graphic aspect, a radio aspect, and a found sound aspect, shown here in detail from his 1952 Water Music score. Its system would include radio stations and all the people that work for them, as well as visual thinkers and poets. Similarly, jazz, for example, with its emphasis on the actions and decisions of the live performer, included elements far afield of the Western musical tradition, including, importantly, the system of live venues, the platforms of face-to-face innovation and improvisation. Richard Maxfield, maybe the first electronic composer in the United States, used magnetic tape, which would pull telecommunications and manufacturing into the fold. Perhaps most famously, James Tenney was working at Bell Labs as a sound researcher, shown here at around 1960. Again, we'd be looking at telecommunications and maybe the national security agencies interested in voice synthesis. If we wanted to characterize the systems that fed their work, We would necessarily include telecommunications and programmers, and probably people like Jack Mullen or John Orr, who enabled commercial applications of technologies from software design to magnetic tape in the US in the 1950s. Finally, George Brecht. I'm so nervous talking about George Brecht in front of the Finally, George Brecht, a New Jersey research chemist who had worked at Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and Mobil Oil, invented the instructional form of performance foundational for Fluxus, called the event, in a course run by John Cage. Brecht's interest in instructional clarity, in chance and randomization, and in this piece, the behavior of water in the realm of audition, no doubt had something to do with the perspective of his training and his day job as a chemist, or maybe the lackadaisical attitude of an errant suitor or friend who left an old faucet running. It should be clear that these positions and experiments extended far beyond the traditional media-specific domains of artistic modernism, implicitly putting pressure on the established terms of academic music, but also academic poetry and modernist painting that dominated cultural commerce at the time. Further confusing matters, many, if not most of these composers were also artists in other media who went on to appear in each other's pieces, to publish each other's works, and to collaborate in works far removed from their areas of academic training. Indeed, the avant-garde at the time was promiscuous in the extreme. Across the arts, culture makers were collectively invested in inventing new art forms through cross-pollination and hybridization, both between the arts and with the sciences. In the 1964 lecture and essay that is the basis for this panel, Marxist artist Higgins coined the term Intermedia to describe the phenomenon. Intermedia operated as an umbrella term that contained, without homogenizing, the graphic notation, sound poetry, and live performance of his friends. As a student with Brecht and Maxfield and John Cage's course in experimental composition at the New School in 1958, and as a poet moving in concrete and sound poetry circles, Higgins was a general co-traveler in these interdisciplinary artistic communities and sought to situate them in deep time. Significantly, he saw the practice of intermedia as part of a larger social paradigm shift. He wrote, quote, "Much of the best work being produced today seems to fall between media. This is no accident. The concept of the separation between media arose in the Renaissance." Let's pull a few pieces out of this larger text to get a sense of what he was saying and what it meant at the time. Quote, "The idea that a painting is made of paint on canvas or that sculpture should not be painted seems characteristic of a kind of social thought," end quote. How so, social thought and painting? At the time, American abstract modernism was seen as a foil to socialist realism in the visual arts. By the 1960s, this government involvement necessitated for many artists avoidance of official culture of both the American abstract and the social realist varieties. Ideas about how one or another medium or artistic mode related to the dialectics of culture is deeply embedded in this essay. Media theorist W.J.T. Mitchell describes the relationship between media as, quote, "a dialectical struggle," in which the opposed terms take on different ideological roles and relationships at different moments in history. Art's mediating systems, in other words, are ciphers for or materializations of dialectical terms. The shape-shifting terms and materials of social transformation that determine what matters and why, and how the world can or should change, and equally importantly for artists, what artistic forms are possible as part of this struggle at a specific moment. The Renaissance, Higgins reminds us here, bequeathed to the future a world of professionalized artists and composers educated in academies, not to mention factories, industrialized labor, and multi-partner trade networks. In the essay, these changes all go together under the generalized category of Renaissance thought that was simultaneously social and artistic, and had the effect of, quote, "categorizing and dividing society into nobility with its various subdivisions, untitled gentry, artisans, serfs, and landless workers, which we call the feudal conception of the great chain of being. Can I drink some of your water? I left the water over there. I promise this is not a piece. Some of you have seen me lecture before. Those are sometimes performances. Contrary to the obsession with media purification associated with capital M modernism, which Higgins understood as a necessary outgrowth of the logic of the Renaissance, the artists and composers Higgins and Blom were involved with were working in ways that took advantage of the new forms of class mobility made possible by the new GI Bill, new forms of despecialization made possible by new forms of mass communication and overproduction, industrial production, and especially the new creative possibilities emerging from innovations in computation and automation. Effectively participating in the breakdown of the feudal conception of the great chain of being that originated before the Renaissance, but which endured in the core class differences of the Industrial Revolution, Intermedia artists at the time were, at least implicitly, breaking down social aspects of the mechanistic approach of the modern. Let's see, into the piece socially with a culturally modernist fixation on materials and manufacturing. In the essay, as in Mormon's festivals, art media and life media blended together, as when Claus Oldenburg produced a hybrid between a sculpture and a hamburger, or when Cage composed with radios or ambient sound were silence. For Higgins, I would argue, intermediality was a result of dialectical synthesis. As an aesthetic system with social implications, in other words, Intermedia gives us a theoretical framework, both for the model with which I began, with Mormon's scrappy note, and the finished program, which sensibility runs through many such documents in the collective activity of the period. Distributed or shared creativity across the arts, and to be sure, between the arts and their social supports, are intermedial in nature. In other words, supports cease being supports in the hierarchical sense, and instead become the scaffolding of an integrated art system. Intermedia is a concept, like Mormon's festivals and artworks as materials, shares a certain utopian sociality with the historic avant-gardes, while at the same time rejecting the homogenizing impulse at the core of state power. This, I think, would be the mindset to bring to Higgins's intermediate diagram, whose hovering bubbles percolate among each other, offering a materially and temporally dynamic means of exploring this word. Let's spend a minute exploring how it works. The top of this slide depicts a detail of Cage's water music. The middle shows a piece by Philip Corner in which Mississippi Delta map was used to determine pitch. And at the bottom, I've placed a poem by Scottish poet Ian Hamilton Finley. Water music would belong to the category of graphic music, since it is spatially laid out. The Finley is a concrete poem, makes language behave according to the graphic potential of the content. This is written in such a way that the letters spell acrobat as they bob, weave, and spin over the surface of the page. Since Finley replaced the squared grid of movable type with a dynamic diagonal grid. Spelled out on the diagonal, and in one letter the word acrobat is placed such that the next letter in the sequence can be found in one of two places that are forward and backwards of the left to right movement of normal reading in English. Because we are habituated to read from left to right and top to bottom, the word we see and the word we read are in dynamic tension, like human tumblers spinning around the axis of gravity and centrifugal forces. The poem's letters behave like acrobats as they register the words certified. But if I describe these words a little differently, they would take different positions in the diagram. This happens because the bubbles and circles overlap as intermedia within intermedia. The logic is dynamic. Another example. Here's a picture of Mormon performing Cage's benchmark 1955 piece 26-1-1499 for strings in 1963. Cage looks calm, not happy, but calm, as he turns the pages for this extremely difficult to perform work. By the time Mormon had really made it her own, as we see in the many years' worth of accumulated markings of her copy of the score, the work's polyvalent intermedial character had spawned a host of other intermedia. It had become a broadcast, a piece of theater, and an audio-visual performance diagram, requiring technicians, a television studio, co-performers, commercial balloons, duck whistles, and more. The diagram helps us see what's going on by giving fluid, adaptive form to the generative, intermediate logic of the work. So graphic music notation, object music, performance art. We wouldn't disagree with those categories probably. But sure. So I will argue with myself. Even this use of the chart is too stiff, treating the diagram of intermedia too much as a hard system. The chart, I would argue, also gives us ample opportunities to assess the multi-authored aspect of the piece, and more importantly, an opportunity to see how the work is a model for distributed creativity. Kate is co-performing with Mormon. Mormon is co-writing with Cage and bringing her own instruments to the work. And thus the chart does not merely diagram the emerging artistic forms associated with the work at the beginning, but creates inroads, introducing a host of pithy theoretical, practical, and institutional implications with regard to authorship, production, and distribution. There seem to be ever more refined locations here. For example, we can think of an intermediate between action music and object music, or another linking object music, graphic music, and science art. They overlap in the intermedia of intermedia's intermedia, a situation Higgins predicted when he described that, quote, over time, intermedia become established media and new intermedia are necessary, end quote. Much more important than where I place what is the process of engagement the chart evokes as a visualization of fluid art tendencies. I'm trying to demonstrate the implications of these at first seemingly innocuous or merely elegant bubbles, that they are dynamic, intended to be played with. This is the view of diagrams articulated in Ina Blom's introductory essay to her 1916 volume. 1916, can you imagine? Writing from the womb. 2016 volume, Memory in Motion, Archives, Technology, and the Social. Quote. From such a perspective, we are focusing on the diagrammatic aspects of media technologies, an operational power that makes history by unmaking preceding realities and significations, constituting hundreds of points of emergence or creativity, unexpected conjunctions, or improbable continuums. It doubles history with a sense of continual evolution. The deep significance of the diagram in this context is not only its resistance to media history as a representation of preceding realities, but also, even more pertinently, its emphasis on concrete, empirical situations of emergence or creativity, end quote. From this standpoint, we make the contrast with the teleological flowcharts that have played a critical, even definitive role in explaining modernism to the general public. The intermediate diagram of media technology with an operational power that makes history by unmaking preceding realities and significations, end quote, to borrow from Blom. The most famous art chart is, of course, Alfred Barr's 1936 style chart, which performs an admirable feat of causal delineation that lands us at MoMA, of which he was the founding director. Barr's chart ends at a dramatic red bar, perhaps indicating the end of the line at the very capital M modernist institution that was, until very recently, structurally predisposed against intermedia. The difference between these charts is not incidental. One charts historical progress in the abstract as a teleological chain, and the other is best understood as a device for mental play with complex, multidimensional artworks. One presupposes an art that is meant primarily for museums and collectors who chart the course of history from within the confines of an established discipline, while the other is anarchic, fluid, decentralized, and interactive. Blom again, quote, "This kind of diagram offers an emphasis on concrete, empirical situations of emergence or creativity," end quote. Even within Fluxus proper, there are charts that are essentially like bars form. These overdetermined links with the monolithic, stylistic systems-based framework of the modern era, or rather, its fraternal twin. I have a twin, I get to use that phrase. The historical avant-garde. Fluxus co-founder and erstwhile artistic director George Machunas constructed detailed Fluxus flowcharts like this that limit the scope of Fluxus in precisely the same way as bars through their fixation on placing artists in a teleology, albeit a more complex one. As a result, they cause widespread debate of the best and worst kind among the artists. This is a very famous chart, maybe perhaps because it's most legible. Understandably, interpreters tend to stop at the two-dimensional chart instead of pushing through to the deeper levels of meaning in Machunas' other charts, where meaning is interactive and spatially complex, unfolds in time, and with higher order inquiry into the work being diagrammed. Machunas' more complex charts and notebooks are, in the words of Astrid Schmidt-Burkhardt, learning machines, meaning multidimensional space-time matrices designed for inquiry and multimodal comparison, as tabs are pulled up, opened up, read, and compared across and within each other. In a place where many of these articles overlap, we find Robert Filiou and George Brecht living in the small French town of Villefranche-sur-Mer, where the two had a tiny anti-store, a casual, open only on request, non-shop of the experimental activity. The store sold books from the small press circuits, art ideas, and other things made, not made, or poorly made, which distinction Filiou famously called equivalences. The two drank wine and talked, critically diverting themselves from the path of professionalism in the arts. The store, called the Cédille qui Sourit, was named for the hanging diacritical below some French C's. Or French speaking, I hope I didn't mention that. This shop was predicated on a coming together of languages and art and other potential actions in the realm of the signifier restricted to the sign, the non-functional meaning the premise of a game. That's a butchered sentence I'm not going to try to fix. Filiou's term, the eternal network, first appeared in March 1968 in the context of the closing of his collaboration with Brecht at the site of the Cédille, on a street with an ancient arch given onto the sea and uncannily called Port Robert. The event was memorialized in the poster, but developed in the publication of Filiou's Teaching and Learning as Performing Arts. Filiou remained briefly in Villefranche, and Brecht moved on to London. Separating from each other, they would be rejoining the wider network of artists. In Filiou's words, quote, "The artist must realize also that he is part of a wider network, going on around him all the time in all parts of the world." This eternal structure, the eternal network, had material aspects. In Filiou's words, quote, "We may need to meet at certain places to gather informations at certain times." The sense of place is, end quote, the sense of place is remarkable in this statement, since network thinking today of the globalizing variety is dominated by an ideology of placelessness. a sense that the reach of networks requires them to be impersonal, placeless, and immaterial. Philly's model, in contrast, required these deeper connections of a material world, at least intermittently. Artists need to meet at certain times in certain places to gather presumably material informations. The network requiring praxis, interaction, which is person to place and situation specific. It could be noted that Dick Higgins and Allison Knowles visited Villefranche and saw the city, and also that Philly visited New York to work on a book about the project. Philly titled the Something Else Press book Games at the Cedilla, or the Cedilla Takes Off. The practice, if not the terminology of an internal network, stands in stark contrast to the all-consuming, monetized networks we now know too well, which suffuse all aspects of contemporary life. Or do they? I will argue with myself. It might be argued that this kind of thinking, internal networks, are commonplace today in a world of hyperlinked searches that lead down various rabbit, worm, and black holes of inquiry into topical relationships that are simultaneously artistic, institutional, and social. This form of thinking socially is now almost routinely associated with the utopian experiments of the 1960s, of which both the Something Else Press and Fluxus and the Cedilla form a part. But such equations flatten out the importance of an idea like Philly's permanent creation, which is effectively, in contemporary terms, a hack, the demobilization of the smooth systems of other, also internal networks, those of finance and government bureaucracy. These artists had a human network to return to because of their work and physical travels. Robert Filiu and George Brecht were both members of Fluxus with contacts in cities across Europe and the US. Both had published with the press before and been in the circle of concrete poets and composers in Darmstadt, who were also part and parcel of how Machinists understood Fluxus. They had engaged with Mormon's Festival and appeared in Cage's Notation Book, another network where the Something Else Press had published. I love this text by Robert Filiu. It's a note to Cage that lands at the number 61, which includes all of the different elements of this creative exchange at that day, on that day. Weirdly enough, this depopulating and dematerializing of the experience of networks in the cultural mainstream dates to the emergence of the term in the larger art world. A quick comparison of Filiu's text from Notations and the benchmark dematerialization book makes this point handily. At about the moment when the term network began to be more widely used to describe mail art and the utopian artist networks of the 1960s more generally, the sense of people, thing, and place so central to Filiu and Brecht's project, as to every socially situated example I've given here, becomes basically suppressed from art discourse, not from art, but it is diminished and de-emphasized in the contemporary writing about that art. Networks, like concepts, were seen through a lens where they're almost completely delocalized into material. The effect, I would argue, is that the work became easily subsumed in the idealizing language of universals appropriated by an emerging, voracious, apparently critical, globalized art market. Dematerialization of the art object, 1966 to 72, demonstrates the astonishing success of these networks by 1973. Ironically, Brecht is the first entry. We see conceptual or information or idea art listed on the cover. Let's see. Well, I'm not going to be many forms of dematerialization that bracket bodies and institutions and materials of art almost explicitly. Clearly, the term dematerialization was rhetorical. In the opening pages of the book, Lepard describes its limits. Quote, "Since I first wrote on the subject in 1967, it has often been pointed out to me that dematerialization is an inaccurate term, that a piece of paper or a photograph is as much an object or as material as a ton of lead. Granted, my emphasis. But for the lack of a better term, I have continued to refer to a process of dematerialization or de-emphasis on material aspects, uniqueness, permanence, decorative attractiveness, end quote. Even though much of Lepard's subsequent writing deals specifically with the physicality of the ephemeral materials of dematerialization and the importance of place, as a rhetorical device, dematerialization entered the lexicon of art criticism as a universalizing generalization well suited to the market. The commercial art world immediately understood that anti-unique, anti-permanent, anti-decorative, and anti-commercial art could be pulled together under the all-embracing, apparently critical terminology of dematerialization and its apparently anti-elitist legacies. Compounding matters, the long list of locations visually emphasizes the placelessness of the work, an understandable and valuable move against a commercial art world based staunchly in New York. Vincent Bonin's important work with Lepard on the 2012 catalog and exhibition Materializing 6 Years, Local Museum and MIT Press, brought this legacy into sharper and more contemporary focus, in particular by emphasizing its feminist and proto-feminist aspects, and situating the project historically. By arguing for Lepard's feminism as adding something substantive to the didactic orientation of much conceptual art at the time, Bonin identifies the false equation of conceptual art and radical art networks with a progressive and neutral humanism that today we might call neoliberal. Given the partial form, the gaps through which dematerialization entered the lexicon as a term of demobilized network creativity, perhaps the surprising facility with which the formal features of dematerialization were affirmed in the marketplace comes as no surprise. Through a process of hyper-monetization of information or experiences or novelty in a newly fashioned globalizing art world, the lumpy, complicated features of dematerialization as a term were largely bracketed from its commercialization. A pass through many an art fair today amply demonstrates the extent to which the voracious appetite of arts commerce has adeptly adapted its palette to the universalizing terminology of dematerialization. Information, as it turns out, is a valuable commodity, especially when it can be secretly scraped away from its physical origins in people and places and moments. This is Thomas Urschel's concept car. I'm using this piece to stand in for too many tendencies and directions in the art fair world, but so be it. I'm not sure the concept car's intended irony makes matters any better. What I mean by bringing it up is that there is no guarantee in the legacy of Intermedia, or the Eternal Network, or dematerialization, or even the legacy of an organization like the Something Else Press, as necessarily leading to the culture we want, that I want today. No matter how admirable and effective the artists were at accessing critically the issues of their time, the forms and terminology we bring to Intermedia and networks, to the underground, to ephemerality, in other words, need to be continuously reworked and rethought. The bigger question that I think Intermedia raises today is this: what can we mine from the era without capitulating to a nostalgic yearning towards an easy openness to other frames and critique of rare objects? Which openness leads us arguably to the current state of this commodity culture, to the Hirshhorn concept car as an Intermedia artwork. It is a commonplace these days to dismiss the 1960s, or at least the hippies and yippies, as a deeply compromised alternative to mainstream or straight culture, as it was known at the time. Indeed, many culture writers today describe the flatness of the de-hierarchicized world of communes and co-ops with their often willful naivete and insistence on the social capital of individual relationships as a harbinger for anti-statist neoliberal economies. When we are nostalgic for the era of early networked art or Intermedia or Mormons festivals, we tend to put a gloss of contemporary dominant culture onto the clunky, awkward, tangled past, and in so doing refashion it for easy contemporary consumption. Necessarily overdetermined dematerialization, this necessarily overdetermined dematerialization at the time and created blindness to the materials used in institutional critique art today. The ways and means artists have of supporting each other and making work that connects to one another likewise evolves. The internal network of the 1960s only superficially resembles that of today. To confuse then and now, or to merely take potshots at the version of the then that survived into the now, is to miss the all-important question of the vast spaces of unstructured activity that develop even as human relationships and creative practices scale up. Regardless, the capacity of the internet to proliferate apparent singularity ad nauseum, the actual granularity that gives each day and each observation, each artwork its texture, retains its resistance. Thank you.
Which of these were you using? Doesn't matter. Actually, is this all right? For everyone?
You don't need to keep mine up there.
Before I begin to lead you down another thicket of words, actually thinking about how my piece begins as quasi-abstract, mostly trying to figure out where I want to go with this really interesting assignment that I feel lucky to have done. I just want to say that I had two personal experiences with Dick Higgins. The first was when I was in my early 20s and was very grateful for Something Else Press. I was in my library, so Something Else Press was particularly significant. And I at a time when I was doing a lot of different things, studying philosophy, doing visual art, and also experimenting with poetry and poetics. I wrote a concrete novel, which it was a short novel. It was really a concrete novella. It was about maybe 30 pages, all designed to be concrete. And I ridiculously sent it to Dick Higgins at the Something Else address. I don't remember exactly what it was. And before too long, I received a letter from Dick, handwritten, that said, essentially, and I couldn't find this letter before I came, it's just as well, but it said essentially, I am sorry that we're not going to be able to publish this, but I want to tell you how much I enjoyed it, particularly the humor and the eroticism of it. So needless to say, I was thrilled. I actually was almost as thrilled as I think I might have been had he said, we want to publish it. Of course, that's a complete obfuscation for the time. But then 30 years later, I found myself living around the corner from Allison and Dick. And I knew Allison well. but not really, I didn't with Dick until the accident that he had, which he was very badly injured and was recuperating with his leg up on a stool and so on. And I went to visit him, and we had a wonderful conversation about philosophy. And we didn't go on having conversations, but those brackets, actually with not much in between, in a way, bracket what I'm about to read. And this begins with the sentence. Actually, it begins with the number 1, because this is a numbered sequence, which gives me the sense of getting somewhere. So 1. Familiarity with the way children acquire vocabularies makes Wittgensteinian observation: to learn a language is to learn a form of life, seem as much truism as profundity. Less apparent is what that means over time, as we tend to persist with linguistic trappings of a present always already being mutated by a contemporary that complicates it. All of that in agonistic motion is what we call the present. And it's where our aesthetic our aesthetic enterprises thrive in a future contingent imagination. I'm actually having a bit of trouble reading this because I interspersed some last-minute corrections or changes. So let me just figure out where these lines go. Novel vocabularies are central to the process of a refreshed and active poesis, and in changing our geometries of attention. New forms made from material residues of a very messy, very much present past. The intention in the sciences and the arts is renovated geometries of attention, and these can bring into the foreground reoriented interests and often ethical concerns. But vocabularies intended to guide geometries of attention, matters of ethos in one historical moment, can grow problematic in another, do grow problematic in another. This is most apparent in orthodox lexicons, whether religious, ideological, or philosophical. Terms like data, futurism, ready-mades, happenings, indeterminacy, chance operations, minimalism, conceptualism, electronic arts, digital poetics, have challenged assumptions about aesthetic space-time logics, disjunction, coherence, agency, intentionality, socio-political relevance, artistic legitimacy, and as important since mid-20th century, the relation of art to everyday life experience. When, in the early 1960s, Dick Higgins introduced the term intermedia as descriptive and prescriptive coordinates of Fluxus-associated activities, he was both wide-angling and focusing in on certain cultural phenomena we can retrospectively connect with John Dewey's aesthetic everyday life, art as experience. Marshall McLuhan's attention to crossings, hybridizations of the media. Collaborative Black Mountain summer sessions, Cage, Cunningham, Rauschenberg's combinatorics and simultaneities as primary logics of relation. The term intermedia, despite its stealth history in the sciences, was in the 60s a fresh stimulus and license for explorations of neglected possibilities and potential confluences of genres in the arts. With considerations of ethos as well as humor, fluidities, a la fluxus, that could and did trigger conceptual shifts, intermedia explorations were exciting and consequential. Here's where questions of then and now, little words, a lot at stake, come in. And actually, when I speak of the stealth history of intermedia, there's a Google Ngram viewer, I don't know how many of you have used that, where you can type in words or phrases and with a marvelous graph on the screen, discover exactly how many uses there were of those words over time. The time frame is 1600 to 2000. So I typed in intermedia, and what I found were delightful uses in the 1600s. Most of the uses actually that I found were scientific, botanicals, ecological, uses for very precise descriptions. One that came up was the phrase intermedia extremis, which I think ought to be followed up on. And another was, let's see, I can find it here. Hybridia und intermedia. It was a 1700 text that was in German. So that actually, in a way, really illuminates what it means that Dick Higgins couldn't Google intermedia in the 60s. He knew of one instance of its use, apparently, and that was Coleridge's essay on allegory, the structure of allegory, actually in Spenser's Fairy Queen. And that's a lovely use. It's actually not intermedia, the word is intermedium, and it is a sentence in which Coleridge is saying that for allegory you have to have the proper intermedium between person and persona. And if that becomes improper, the allegory doesn't work. It's a very brief essay, very lovely observation. 2. During John Cage's 1988-89 remarkable lectures at Harvard, he responded to audience questions about what he was doing and why. The lectures were in the form of a long, not entirely transparent, Visostic poem. The questions and his answers were printed in a stream along the bottoms of the pages in the published version of the lectures. Here is one of the exchanges. audience member question. A remark that you made about selecting the material you were going to use for your lectures because of its your unpolitical stand, leads me to wonder, do you think of your music as having political content? Do you think of it as having political effect? Cage answers, I think one of the things that distinguishes music from the other arts is that music often requires other people. The performance of music is a public occasion or a social occasion. This brings it about that the performance of a piece of music can be a metaphor of society, of how we want society to be. Though we are not now living in a society which we consider good, we could make a piece of music in which we would be willing to live. And that is the key phrase that I'm going to be emphasizing, a piece of music in which we would be willing to live. He goes on, I don't mean that literally, though I have a lot of skepticism about his not meaning it literally, because I think he literally was composing in a way that he wanted to live in his compositions and wanted others to find they could live in those and similar kinds of compositions. And I, of course, think of Allison's book in which you could live. And I mean, that was a wonderful composition made out of wood and all the things that she described yesterday. A musical composition is made out of sound and the space-time that we are in as we are hearing that sound or performing that sound. I had some conversations with Cage about this after several encounters with this whole sense of the composition being a structure for living in, not simply for observing from the outside. And I realized that Wittgenstein, Cage and I talked about quite a bit in talking about language as a form of life, is really saying essentially the same thing. That as we are learning language and as we are using language, we are enacting the form of life that language enables us to live, and also points us to possibilities of other ways of living. The exchange between the audience and Cage's response came to mind as I was reading Dick Higgins' 1966 statement about Intermedia, which we've seen a great deal of now. I think that Higgins was expressing something not only about the kind of world in which he wanted to live in part of that essay, but advocating for the kind of art that he thought might make that world more of a possibility. And what I'm referring to is the passage that is in actually the first paragraph of the article society, to which separation into rigid categories is absolutely irrelevant. I would like to suggest that the use of intermedia is more or less universal throughout the fine arts, since continuity rather than categorization is the hallmark of our new mentality. That actually, the way he structures that reminds me so much of Cage in things like Diary, How to Improve the World, you will only make it worse. I think when Higgins wrote this, it was actually more manifesto than report on the ground, even a bit utopian, envisioning desires for an improved future as if it were already part of the present. And I think that is a feeling manifestos almost always have. It has arrived because I am speaking of it now. In the 1960s and 70s, intermedia in the arts was present in exciting ways, but was quite a bit less universal than Higgins was suggesting. Now, however, 60-odd years hence, and they've been very odd years, actually, his proclamation of a universal intermedia culture can seem prophetic. What Higgins or anyone else could not have predicted was that the word intermedia would become a universal signifier for almost every aspect of our culture, in which almost every sensory stimulus is understood as a form of information delivered by an array of media. Google intermedia now, and you will get, in comparison to the one predecessor use Higgins admitted to with great honesty, you will get 50,200,000 entries in 88 seconds. And that actually, I sort of rushed through a sampling of those different parts of that, and Higgins comes up a lot whenever the intermedia is about art. The term intermedia arts, which I also Googled, came up with 9,380,000 entries in 45 seconds, so in less time. Perhaps if it had had 88 seconds, it would have been more. Pre-Google, I've already said this. Higgins admitted to college, getting to it first. What has happened in the word is that the word media, independent of the portmanteau connection to internet, is no longer just or even primarily about art. It's about, among many other things, how we live day in, day out with a barrage of information from the media in an electronically, digitally, inter and intra-mediated, networked world, filled with simulacra that seem to close gaps between things we count as real. The scene, the Anthropocene, is an unprecedented phenomenon of novel, intersecting, and colliding media vectors that demand and shape our attention. And it is ubiquitous. The sheer numbers of all this discordant stimuli mean that we now, once again, question mark once again, need a poetics of daily life that is as helpful in situations of discontinuity as certain other poetics might have been once in the past, or still for the humdrum of too much continuity. A poetics in touch with chaos theory is its fractal geometries and descriptive efficacy for complex systems, from historical and economic patterns to the always slightly erratic rhythms of normal human brain waves, presents us with a positive and even generative understanding of the potential in dramatically unpredictable juxtapositions. There's history in this too. Gertrude Stein's 4 Saints in 3 Acts, John Cage's Anarchic Harmonies, and music services have explored territory which has of late become of greater pragmatic interest for reasons that have little to do with the aggressively disruptive avant-garde strategies using similar elements in earlier eras. Following Cage's poetics and ethics, what I came to call his poethics, another portmanteau word, the most pressing question that arises for me is how the word intermedia might freshly be useful in light of the imperiled future germinating in our chaotic geopolitical presence, chaotic and climate crisis and full of our Anthropocene wreckage and dread. The continuing dream of the kind of society in which a reasonably decent person would be pleased to live is at stake. Is the scale of this thought experiment at this point naively disproportionate to the limited agency we have been feeling we actually have in media's mess of too many emergencies? 4. This is where I think Cage's lecture on nothing comes in, at least where it comes in for me. And I'll read a portion of it in just a few minutes. We actually aren't overlapping much in the portions we've chosen. But first I want to say something about the temporal provenance of 3 words. This entire talk, you may have noticed, is about words. The words I have in mind form a triadic conceptual framework in the development of Cage's procedures as attempts at cultural agency, stimulating energy and change by redirecting our geometries of attention. They are chaos, these words, synchronicity, and silence. All 3 gained currency in the second half of the 20th century. As cultural vectors, their confluence radically revised Cage's geometries of attention, and thus his aesthetics and poetics. Chaos and silence were radically redefined at that time. Silence, of course, by Cage. Synchronicity was a term coined and defined by Carl Jung in his foreword to the 1950 Burlingame edition of the I Ching, a kind of handbook and procedural source for Cage's approach to composition. The redefinition of chaos was largely the result of digitally modeled meteorological systems on newly powerful computers. Much of this developed at the Alamogordo laboratory of atom bomb infamy. That work spawned the sciences of complexity, aka chaos theory, aka complex dynamic systems theory. Maybe complex word theory too. But actually, when you were talking about the word one of the developers of chaos theory, James York, who actually coined the term, and who I knew as a colleague at the university where I was teaching at the time, actually developed that sense of chaotic complexity entirely from his observations and precise measurements of the effluent of drips in a faucet. So this was another kind of James York. We can talk about that. York, Y-O-R-K. If you Google him, you'll find out he coined the term chaos theory. I should never look up from what I'm reading, or look up forever, because finding out where I was is hard. Okay, so all of this led to a spectacularly revised understanding of an ancient word and concept, chaos. Even in some of the translations of the first bit of Genesis, chaos and waste across the whatever there was then. It had for millennia, chaos, been thought of as the opposite of order, disorder. It turns out that unalloyed disorder in nature is impossible by the rules of the physics of our universe. A new understanding of chaos was formulated largely by modeling very bad weather systems. And it was formulated in this new way as pattern-bounded indeterminacy in a dynamic equilibrium of order and disorder. This is a very beautiful definition of chaos. I'll repeat it. Pattern-bounded indeterminacy in a dynamic equilibrium of order and disorder. So chaos includes order. Actually, Jackson McCloud was thrilled when his physicist's son told him about this, and particularly added the term deterministic chaos, feeling that what he was doing using computerized randomized structures had a deterministic dynamic, which he had been worried for, I think, decades, that he was flouting the order of things in the world, made him very nervous. This helped. An excellent description of a hurricane or music by John Cage, composed using chance operations, can just be formulated in that way. When I talked with Cage about this in the late 1980s, he said he had not known about the development of chaos theory, but it cohered with his uses of chance. He went on to say, and I quote, "It must have been in the air." He said that often about these things. Recently, the same sort of thing has been said about Shakespeare's less Greek, despite which, not having adequately studied Greek, Shakespeare outdid many Cambridge students and Oxford students in what he did with the Greek, with the classics. And the fact is that ancient Greek culture was one with the classics in the, or ancient Greek culture was in the air of the Renaissance culture. Cage's principle of anarchic harmony is entirely coherent with chaos theory, as was his adherence to and use of the Buddhist principle of interpenetration and non-obstruction. That might interestingly illuminate some approaches to intermedia principles of composition. 5. Carl Jung, in his essay introducing the I Ching to a Western audience, coined the word synchronicity in an attempt to understand the Chinese principle of coincidence. And he puts a hyphen in there. Thought to be as potent a relation as cause and effect in China, in Chinese culture. Jung wrote that this assumption involved a certain curious principle that I have termed synchronicity, which takes the coincidence of events in space and time as meaning something more than mere chance. I object to mere chance. Mere chance is not mere. Namely, a peculiar interdependence of objective events among themselves, as well as with the subjective states of the observer or observers. And actually that principle, pretty much straight from the Bullingdon I Ching, became the aesthetic principle of the space-time relation of dance to music in Cage and collaborations. This led to the unexpected as the baseline characteristic in intermedia composition, realized as pattern-bounded intermediacy, indeterminacy. 6. The third word is silence, and I'm going to let it speak for itself by reading a portion of Cage's lecture, Nothing That I Feel Has the structure that Cage clearly wants to be living in as lecturer, as he is giving a lecture, that he considers a composition in the way he considers a composition that is music. And he says this over a stretch of time, I suppose. What we require is silence. But what silence requires is that I go on talking. He then goes on to say that we can have discussion or maybe not have a discussion. But now there are silences. And the words help make the silences. I have nothing to say, and I am saying it. And that is poetry. as I need it. This space of time is organized. We need not fear these silences. We may love them. This is a composed talk. For I am making it just as I make a piece of music. Seven. Cage's radical, limitlessly useful redefinition of silence is simply this. Silence is not the absence of noise. That's impossible given the physics of our universe. It is everything we are not noticing. When I taught seminars at Bard titled Silence and Art, I divided our inquiry and our experiences of silence into three somewhat arbitrary parts. I say arbitrary because silence suffuses everything we are, everything we do, everything we don't do. Nevertheless, the three, with micro-glosses, are as follows. Aesthetic silence. Apertures to the world outside the composition. Meditative silence. Listening to the world apart from one's own ego. I love the fact, and this brings it to mind, that in English, silent has all of the letters of the word listen, only in a different order. You can try that. Make you feel very good to rewrite silent as listen and vice versa. And then finally, in this threesome that I'm arbitrarily putting together, social silences. What is everywhere around us but remains unnoticed. All three, in a better world than we are now part of, could be engaged as interpenetration and non-obstruction for the betterment of all us others, genders, races, species. Given the current long-standing emergency of our defiled biosphere, I've taken this opportunity to think about conceptual frameworks that suggest a vitally relevant poethos. They are, as you know, associated with John Cage's work and that of many others, many fluxus and intermedia suspects. As not so sapient humans committed to the arts, where should we and they be in all this? Will renewed perspectives on what has been called intermedia help? What does or would that mean at this point? And actually, I also feel our perspective on intermedia ought to go back in time as well, because the uses are fascinating. Go 19th to 18th to 17th century. There is no simple answer, of course, perhaps no answers at all, other than our responses as artists, essayists, thinkers. Happily, in that bailiwick, a lot of searching and attempting is going on. I'm going to end with a coda from 1942, from a poem by Wallace Stevens called Connoisseur of Chaos. And I'm going to read just the first section of it. 1. A violent order is a disorder, and B, a great disorder is an order. These two things are one, pages of illustrations. For numbers 2 to 5, I strongly suggest you get a hold of the rest. Thank you.
Wow, what an amazingly coherent panel. We didn't know that was going to be the case. Incredible. So, what I think is sort of immediately I want to bring out is the way that Intermedia is kind of, taking a full circle, starting with the social and the technological in terms of networks and things like the postal system, which is barely used anymore, but that is a construct of the social that seems to have been kind of all over the place. And then how that connects to the communal. And then, moves into the definition of all these terms get redefined in each phase, and we now have a network that we don't recognise in terms of any materiality or any place. So I guess everyone underscored the sociality of what we're talking about with Intermedia. So it's supposed to signify something about conduits, but actually it connects people through ethics, through art, and ways that they need to be together, ironically enough. So I wonder if we could just... I actually didn't have full picture. Let's get this over before so I wonder if we could just begin to talk about that connectivity. And I guess Hannah and Ina have their own definitions of the social. Amazingly enough, Joan brought up Dewey, which is sort of the basis of Hannah's first one. So how would you two, first of all, discuss and clarify your different definitions of the social? Ina's is sort of heading in a technological direction, I think, or sociality, let's say, based on more contemporary art examples. Or, I don't know, you guys tell me, and I don't know, you have some difference, even though you're almost using the same or similar words.
Should I try to... Can you hear me? I don't have the loudest voice, but I'll try. So what is important to me is, and this is, a question that's been raised in a lot of recent sociology as well, it's a question of what is the social? Is it a thing? Is it something that we know? Or is it constantly an open question, something, new connections being made that are made, something that we have to follow, something we cannot take for granted? And there's various ins and outs to that. And all I wanted to point to is the fact that in the work of Ray Johnson and its interaction with Higgins, there seems to be rather an assertion of something social that we know, and then we can just map in various ways. You have, the essential questions of what is this thing? How should we even start to think of these things? Not to take these things for granted, not to take any type of connections for granted. And I think that's the essence of it. And I just want to say one thing, because I thought it was so great that you wrote go back to you and the eternal network. Because I think one of the works, a companion work in Go Back to You, to the eternal network, is this work which is called Something for the Third Eye, which you may or not be familiar with, but it's an amazing physical construction based on 3 dimensions: the well-made, the badly made, and the not made. So the well-made is you take a little stock box. And it's done in a way that's nice. And then you take another little box and another little sock and you make it kind of look more classier. And that's the badly made. And then you have a not made, which is a third box, which is just empty. Now, this is just the beginning. Robotic continues, and it's very important that this is physical construction. By taking the first ensemble of 3 little boxes and saying this is one ensemble and this is well made. And then it makes another ensemble of 3, which is badly made. And then a third ensemble, which is just a big empty field, which is the not made. And then what you notice as it does this is that rather than having the equality of 1, 2, 3 and they're all like equally sized, the not made increases. There's a little mathematical trick to this. The more he goes on to do this, the more the dimension of the not made increases. And he says that if we continue with this piece, in the end, the not made will encirculate the Earth by so and so many kilometers, etc. And I mean, this is, to me, the essence of this, the increasing production of the not known. I mean, the idea that we are in the situation of, I mean, this is basically what we does to as virtuality. Not as some kind of dimension of, synthetic creation or something like that, but the fact that we do not know where we are. I mean, things are being created. Things are constantly being made. So it's this principle that underpins it. Now,
I said, yeah,
I'll go on. Look at better the ideological dimension to this later, because I don't necessarily see all of these things in utopian terms, but that's my question.
Can I just bridge you two for a second? So I think you also have this stand, a little round circle. It says bien fait, parfait, mal fait. So it's that you could sign, tick which one you think that object is, right? So for me, more than the unknown, it has a question of the ethics of even making something, right? And I would probably contrast that with Lawrence Wiener's statement, the artist may construct the work need not be built, right? So they're both around about the same time. But Wiener actually says it's all according to the intention of the artist. And that's precisely what Duchamp, Cage and Fluxus got rid of by the, eventually the indeterminate score. But also, when you say you decide, your judgment, do you think it's well made or badly made or should it be made at all? So it's this ethics of even making it. And I think knowing the object, it's also about, if you do make it, is there something valid about that experience? And I think that's where your work comes in about, experiencing something or the lack of necessity to put more things in the world, or, what the ethics of making or not making is. Question?
So I'm also thinking of a Filiu, since we'll use Filiu as a kind of case study. And I'm thinking of a different piece, which is is it world false fingerprints? Right. So this idea that, and it's also a field, and it's fingerprints in every box with different people's names on them. And so for me, that is a kind of image of what the social is, a kind of a declaration of a proliferation of people with whom we have nothing in common, and an attempt to somehow connect to them. Right? And in that connecting, something that's both true and false. So it's not, I don't really have a theory as much as ideas about education. Obviously, for Dewey or Black Mountain or even Capra, I mean, when artists become teachers, and in a sense, I think everyone on this panel is in a sense an artist teacher. When artists become teachers, I think they're assisting in this production of that field of false fingerprints, right? In a sense, trying to give people tools that that connect them to to one another. But I think the point I'm trying to make incoherently is that there isn't a common field of the social at all, person to person, and I think that's what Ian's getting at too. And yet, if we don't pretend momentarily that there is, then we have no hope for these problems that we're experiencing, right? The problems at the Anthropocene of the ecology. So solving those major issues is going to require a sort of a willingness to pretend that we have this thing in common, which is called being human beings trying to survive. And so I think I feel we're sort of grasping at that commonality, using lots of different terms, and that's why for me maybe that's why that world of false fingerprints is emblematic of that possibility. And that's all I got. I don't have a system.
So, actually, can I say what I meant by social?
Yep.
Very simple. Because I used it at the end of the talk in talking about social silence. And that's actually a term I think should speak for itself and to all of us, because our problems with the renegade truth morass that we're in has to do largely with social silence, with people not noticing or not speaking up when they do notice. And of course it goes back to, I mean, it was a very important term in during the major AIDS crisis in part of our world. It's still going on. So social for me has to do with association, what the association is between us and others, and actually what we care about. It has to be that as well. There is no social without caring. There really isn't.
I don't know, keep asking you individual things or open it up. Is it something you want to write to? I mean, I've got sort of a few questions for each of you, but it's been already, yeah? Well, oh, sorry, sorry.
No, you have it.
Well, I guess I'm going to connect you, ask more about the infrastructural when. And this was very fascinating the way you sort of showed how Johnson gave affect and added to the time of receiving, sending and receiving a letter. And I think, Greg had this idea of you're one zone now when you get an event score. And I think Greg was mailing out his event scores before, influenced by Johnson, mailing his mailing system. He did it first, right? So how do you kind of make the now jump out, or and you've thickened that by the concept of the gift, and then in the way of Ray using that without the idea of the gift, right? Like withdrawing it as he edits his own impact in a certain way. And, it's funny, Capro, to bring all this, because Capro said, I don't think people are just going to receive things in the mail and react. Like he didn't have too much faith that anyone would be unself-conscious enough, particularly say with Greg Scores, to perform it in their house, or listen to a drip or something like that. And so he said, it's a very radical proposition, but I doubt if anyone's actually going to do it. So somehow you had to kind of there had to be some causality, and maybe Ray's ethic of the gift, even to make people believe they got a gift. And now people have saved all those little collages that actually were a gift, So do you think that's how he thickened the now and developed a kind of affectless, impact?
Well, I think that what he was doing with this was using a system that is functioning infrastructure, the postal system, and that is the image of social connectivity, actual social connectivity, and using that to not give guarantees of you will receive, you will do, you will read, and so on, but rather as a system of underscoring the potential of loss, fragmentation, non-connection, etc. But I think that, I mean, what we talked about the terms we want to get from the Intermedia, I said at the beginning, so I reread it, and beyond is, you know, this social topic that he brings up instantly, there's two terms which really, you know, underpins what I was trying to talk about. He speaks about change, and he speaks about continuity. And I mean, this is exactly what is key to what Ray Johnson is doing. I mean, the system, the mailing system is a system of continuities, of connections, etc. But it's also, in his version of it, a system of constant changes, dispersal, etc. Now, why these things touch me so deeply, I think, and why I've always been fascinated by this, is, I think, the extreme contemporaneity of these issues. And this is why I want to link it to the question of infrastructure and new ways of thinking infrastructure, rather than thinking media. And this is also where the ideological problems or issues come in. So, on the one hand, I see these artists as utopian thinkers in many ways, thinking open futures, possibilities, the ethics of listening, etc. Constant change and the continuities of changes, which is, you know, a beautiful image. On the other hand, these works are like early warning systems for deep structural changes. I mean, the continuity of changes, that's the reality we're living. We're constantly, I mean, through the technologies, the media, the economic systems we're working with these days, we are tuned to the constancy of change. This is what this is how we live. We live with constant updating. I mean, one channel has a beautiful way of describing habits, the way we understand habit these days in the media. Habit is crisis, constant change. It's not repetition in the old sense. It's you know, getting to the same. Habit is being constantly attuned to updating. So these are, you know, this is the basis of the social today. This is the basis of our economy. It's the basis also of our eco-crisis. You know, this constant dynamics of, you know, of change. So, and I think that, I mean, it's something extremely interesting indeed. It's something that the Higgins wrote in the literature in the 1970s for Dragon, that with intermediates, that it even affects homosexuality. So the fluidity of his sexuality and the amazing ways in which he expressed this and lived it. But this is also linked, I think, very deeply to, I mean, the type of biopolitical scenario we've been living with for, you know, the past 100 years. So the idea that we can change, we must change, self-change, so to speak, you know, how we are compelled to live. So Higgins is writing about the fact that in a classless society, which is of course not existing. I mean, class differences are as deep. I mean, they're deepening by the second. We're living as if they're not existing, and we're acting as if. Exactly.
So the rich and poor.
Yes. And this is, I mean, this is a political difficulty these days. That I mean, through the type of ideologies and technical infrastructure we live in, it's as if those things do not exist. But of course, they are existing. So this is the kind of complex, deeper grounds of these things. And I happen to think that artists are not necessarily always, you know, alternatives to power. I think that rather they are, you know, early warning systems, and it's incredible kind of interesting sensors for shifts in power, which is not a negative thing.
Can I say something concrete, Ina, about all of this? You talk about change with Ray, and there's this wonderful anecdote, just to speak to another director of the Henry Harvey Foundation, who's had a big impact on me, Henry Martin. But he did an interview with Ray Johnson some years ago, and he remembered going to a visit with Julian Higgins' widow, and Ray was sort of showing him all of her old collages, and Henry says that he liked to do a kind of performance with his work and set it up differently according to who the audience was and everything. And Julian's Levy's widow, whose name I forget, said, well, Ray, why don't you record it as you're presenting all these pieces? And then other people will know what they're all about. He said, don't be silly, it's going to be different every time. You know, and so the collages come together differently. There are many collages, and people see different things in the work. She saw things, every recipient of Ray's would see something. So I think that speaks to how you address these big things in a concrete, material way.
Exactly.
And I think that's what all these artists at this time, if they have anything to tell us now, it's probably harder to do that now. But when you did have the postal system, and when you did have something physical to pass around and share, and the idea of even meeting, as we don't have it, we have it much less now, maybe that's something we can get out of that time.
And one thing I'm thinking also is that, and I think this came up yesterday, I don't remember if it came up in the panel or not, but Dick didn't necessarily associate Intermedia with electronic media. And I think that's also extremely important because I think that's where some of this peeling off happens, where I think it's true that we are in a sense a classless society because our social is running through media that is functionally classless. We all have the same devices with the same bullshit coming through on them. We are having the same social life through them. So that is, in a sense, a culturally classless world. Even, and maybe that's what's made possible the extraordinary expansion of income inequality in the world off those devices, right? Because they're distracting and wonderful for someone with, you know, with access Y. You know, the same stuff is coming through on them. Maybe your audio is better if you have a more expensive device, or you have access to more film subscriptions. But I think that's, I think that I had a conversation with Dick later in his life where he was sort of bewildered that it became this language for media. I think he was open to it becoming that language for media, but it was sort of a surprise that happened. And I think, you know, it's part of what I was trying to get at in that criticism of the dematerialization logic is because I think that's actually part of what we're talking about. The idea that sort of floats around up there.
Can I ask you a question about that? Just very briefly, because it was so close to 105.
Yeah.
So it would surprise me that it would not be, because I was actually theorizing this aspect of the, you know, the electronic world quite early.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think that's a great question. I still think it was sort of a surprise to him.
Actually, I'd like to just say something in response to the classless smartphone users. I think that's an illusion of classlessness that will only last as long as we.
But that's the point. This is everything. I mean, that's why Trump can lie.
But it's not everything. You know, in the material circumstances that people are living in, that is not everything. The fact that they are.
That's my point. That's my point. Is that it's colonized so much of folks' attention. It's true. When the phone goes down, there's terrible life outside that home. I'm definitely not saying that's true. I'm saying though that the culture of, you know, whether it's left or right or sophisticated or very simple and propagandistic, the media is the message. The thing it is communicating the same insulated world, and people are addicted to it. They're wildly addicted to it.
Well, they are. Well, we are. I'm not actually. I have a smartphone and I have a dumb phone. But that is a world of fantasy. I mean, the difference between, say, fantasy and imagination is that imagination is an active, creative interaction with the world. And there is revenge of the real if you do it in a way that is foolish or in some way wrong for circumstances. Fantasy just cuts you off from all consequences, and it is an area where there is no truth value, really. And so I see my I feel, I think about Bourdieu's notion of the habitus, in which unconsciously our values and our ways of being are being transmitted constantly to new generations that are being reinforced without our really being aware that that's going on. And so this, I mean, if class inequality is a problem, it's a real problem. It's not a fantasy problem.
I agree, but I think that Donald Trump, in a sense, is a fantasy president, right? Because the people who support him view the outcomes as things they want. It's actually completely divorced from the action, from the world. They're in that fantasy. So I'm definitely not saying the world is classless. I'm saying the language of a classless society is precisely what is coming through the entertainment media culture that is in everyone's pocket. And people spend more and more time there with less and less sense of what the connection is between the truth they receive or the non-truth they receive there and the world outside of it. That's precisely my point. I mean, I'm fundamentally in agreement. I just, I'm pessimistic about people's ability to get away from it.
Well, I'm just weary of connecting class questions with
Entertainment,
smartphones.
that's the problem.
Joan, can I ask you something about what you said about Cage's lectures and the way that he maybe didn't anticipate everything that he was trying to speak to and sort of late in life had to adapt his work. It sounds a little related to, I mean, when you were talking about his models that like sort of the world started, I mean, how to improve the world and all these sort of later texts. I mean, he couldn't have envisaged what would happen with, the world and society and everything, but he created these structures for living in it, for thinking about it, to join up with that model. And I mean, Hannah already said that Higgins didn't think of Intermedia in the way that it's become. So it's sort of interesting that how do you create a model for something that's not yet here? It's very speculative. Maybe you don't think of half of it, but maybe it happens because of the solidity and the ethics of the model. And then, I mean, Alison did that book because, now books have become, completely, the status of the book has changed. So what does it mean to create a book that you can be inside and communicate inside and live in? I don't know, I guess I'm just asking about the sort of the morals and what's envisaged and what's possible by just creating a version of something you can live with and live in. And I think you both said something about that. You said a world that I would want to live in, and you said that Kate was sort of making some music or a lecture or a construct that he could live in and live with in a way.
Well, but that is very much present tense. Though the present tense model, which you then enter and experience and decide whether you want to be living in that or not, can become a model for the future if you choose for it to be. But I mean, I think the major sort of surprising insight that comes with Cage's notion of making a piece of music in which you want to live is that you actually are living in that piece of music as you are composing it and as you are hearing it, experiencing it, and that I think that's in contrast to a thought that you leave, that you have to be either in everyday life or you're in art. And even if the art is in some way engaging aspects of everyday life, you're suspending your living in some way as, in relation to the art experience. Sort of, in a way, that sort of relates to what your sense of what's happening when someone is interacting with the smartphone. And what Cage was saying was that he had to think about whether he would want to live in this way, say in the way of one of the musicians who would be playing his music. And this had a lot to do with his giving a great deal of room for musicians to do what they chose to do within time frames. So he was, in fact, his whole vocabulary of composition being based on time frames, it's really like a time frame is as much a structure that you're entering in a very real way as the frame of the house, and the frame of everything you're walking into.
Abstracting macros simultaneity is like a model of all people cooperating in a space, of performance, as if modeling it in performance. I always found this a kind of social, ethical aspect of the simultaneity, cooperating to make that work.
And you're living that, that's your way of life for the time that you were doing that.
I think we should open it up to the audience because to give you guys a chance to ask some questions, it's already 6. Jared?
It's a sort of complex question that relates to several words that several of you have mentioned. Joan in particular talking about illusion and truth, and Hannah, you're talking about us trying to pretend that we live in somehow.
I don't really like that word choice. I think what I mean is more a decision to connect. So it's the decision that is love, or it's a decision you make to have a connection with people. My point was that there isn't something inherent in it. I mean, I think human beings are inherently social, but they're inherently social because of a series of social decisions that they make to connect to people for all manner of reasons. So no universalizing system of social is going to actually get at that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, but that sense of being connected, or the kind of atomization that capitalist culture, particularly in extremis in American modern culture, tries to tell us that we're not connected and tries to send us into little pigeonholes and little boxes where we live separately. And this idea that you have about where truth is and how truth is different to like the illusion of us all having access to the same devices that give us the same access to media. It strikes me that those are words that truth and illusion that come directly from Buddhist teachings and the teachings of yoga. And this is just a general question then, that is there a tension then between, or a complex relationship between these ideas in the 60s about intermedia and connecting the media back together again, and the idea that these things are not disconnected, that might come from Suzuki's teachings through Cage, through his course at the New School, to many of the participants in that course who were participants in the new media and the intermedia, that one of the fundamental notions of Buddhist teachings is that there is no separation, there is no other, that we are in fact all the same. It's a good question.
Well, I don't know. We're all the same. everything the same there, and that our insides and our outsides are one, and so on. Truth, as I've been thinking about it recently, I've been writing an essay that involves really thinking about the word truth, which was almost interchangeable with the word troth in Middle English and even earlier English, which meant something that you essentially promise to do, and really, in turn, which means an ethos. So truth would be a way of living. Now that would relate to the Buddhist idea, I think. Unless you're talking about the metaphysics of truth, which I can't do or think about, except that brings on, for me, the phrase, the revenge of the real. That if truth as a notion becomes too metaphysical or too illusory in one way or another, the real steps in and it kicks in. And that I've noticed about myself is the only confident way in which I can use the word real at this point. I have no idea what reality means except square one before we showed up to start naming things. I think reality is the whole Megillah, the whole shebang, and we have no say in that word as a would-be inclusive abstraction that means something. So, I don't think I've helped hone in on this.
Well, I think it's interesting that you brought up the Joan introduction to the I Ching, because he sort of does this opposition between, in that text, between what we worship as causality, the non-Western mind, doesn't take much notice of, and what we think is chance is their major focus, right? So there's all these oppositions, and I think they've started using ideas of non-dualism. And I don't think it's the Zen moment in lecture on nothing, I think it comes a bit later. But I think he was trying really to bring in those ideas into the language and into the way he made work and everything. And obviously the silence, not being silence and not being intention, is emblematic of that. So whether he had absorbed it all, whether he was using that as a technical model to create work that didn't have this sort of duality, I don't know. I'm not really answering it either, but I think that's the Buddhist relation to specific works in it that we've been talking about. Is that all helpful? Someone else? Oh yes, Andreas.
Thank you all. Thank you all. I'm particularly intrigued by what you said, Ina, with regards to the invaluable object as a gift. And I think I'm most curious about how you were all discussing the social. I think it makes a lot of sense that they would be surprised how much media will be used now, because it's the utmost, like the way techno finance would use that term is the utmost recuperation and bastardization of the term. But if we think of the social historically as something rooted in the construction of a subject, let's say a revolutionary subject in Marxist terms, and then the media portion of intermedia, perhaps a form of considering how we might actually relate to that media and the interactions between them is a sort of collective and mutual ownership of that information. And I wonder if the gift, in the way that you're describing it, this invaluable object, might be a way to consider information today, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you're addressing a big topic. And obviously, the internet was spoken of as a gift economy, and anybody working in academia etc. Right. We know at the same time, that this, gift economy or so-called gift economy of, the basic infrastructures are also anything but. I mean, they're also, capitalized upon by, all sorts of forces. So it's not exactly the utopia of a gift economy. But then, anthropologically, the gift economies were never about utopias. It's a basic description of the social connection, right? It was used by anthropologists to describe how does societies imagine, and enact ritually cohesion. It's by gift giving. And the difficulty of gift giving is that it is actually a form of trade, except that you always insert a moment delay, right? You cannot give something back the moment the gift is given, because then it's like trade. So it's a very complicated thing. And what Ray Johnson pointed to, actually, more than a decade before Derrida got to that point, was the fact that these are all social fictions. It's a way of constructing a certain idea of something that we need somehow to imagine society as a thing. So what if we open that up to questioning, and we look at it as a specific sort of fiction, and not as reality as something given, but as something that has to be somehow reimagined with questions, whether cynically or in a utopian manner. Does that make sense?
If you allow me just one follow-up question.
Yeah.
Then, so the one way of thinking about collective ownership of information would be to ascribe information the same sort of like exceptional commodity status that a utopian imagination of art would have, right? That art is not traded along, or that a utopian position would assume that art isn't traded along the same exchange, right? I think, if you'll indulge me just for one moment, I think there's often a misconception between dematerialization and immaterialization of labor, right? So dematerialization assumes the negation of some materiality to some object. It's taking away, whereas the immaterialization of labor often just obscures the material conditions, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think Herschel is a perfect example of this, right? You come into a community where you just bring the police with you, right? There's a material condition here.
Absolutely.
So I wonder whether we should think about information the way we think about art as a way to, or the way somebody thinking utopianly about art might think about art, if that makes sense.
Do you think information is always a gift?
No, I think it'd be great if it was.
Yeah, but it's
Often it's forced,
it's
right?
a trap. It's
Right,
not
of course.
Siri. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I think it's fine.
So if I understood you well, Ray Johnson kind of resisted the Bau's theory of gift and countergift.
Yes, I mean, actually, I don't know if you read Maus at all, but I had a sense of, by speaking of the moment of giving, I had this moment of
And
existence.
then that moment can be any moment. That's where the utopia, that's the last little corner where you could find some kind of utopia or some kind of philosophy. I could go on with that. But I have a question because I don't know the work of Ray Johnson well enough. Who are the addressees and who are the receivers? And are the addressees the receivers? Because those are two different concepts.
Yes, absolutely. So, the network that was built up started as, based on friends in the New York art world, and then it expanded, exponentially. But I think it's important that Ray Johnson was constantly emphasizing the fact that the reciprocity person-to-person was interesting. He wanted, what he did when he received this letter, thank you, from Mr. St. Aubin, was that he passed it on to the third person. And that was rather than responding to St. Aubin, he passed it on to Bill Wilson. So he was always emphasizing the fact that it was a network that's not back and forth, not reinforcing
all these pieces of mail art, have they been gathered? Have they been collected? Are they really dispersed, or does a museum possess them?
I mean,
Or several?
museum collections do exist, but it's like an impossible, absolutely impossible thing, because, you know, things, you can have certain things, like what I have accessed in my research was the things that Bill Wilson happens to have, thanks to his close relationship with Ray Johnson. There's a zillion, I mean, more loose ends to that material than I can possibly think of, because of all the things that were sent to people that we have no idea where it is. So there's absolutely no way you can have a mail art collection in the sense that you would have, for instance, a collection of the archives around something else.
Then it's more an economy of dépenses in the battalion sense than an economy of gifting.
Yes, yes. So that's another way of
So to make a
it.
comparison, I had in mind when Ankawara sends postcards to a number of people, friends but also collectors, saying I'm still alive, there is a recipient whose address is on the postcard, but I have the feeling that the real addressee is not the recipient. I was very moved once, but you can also look at this very critically, that in an exhibition of Ankawara, there were all these postcards who had been sent to all corners of the world, but they had come back together to be in one collection or in one presentation at least. So, am I right to say that or to surmise that it's not the case at all with Ray Johnson? It's a different process.
I think it's a different process, and I think it's. I mean, I had a slide that was a kind of a seating plan for a meeting. He had these imaginary meetings for his so-called mail art network. Now, if you look at that seating plan, those meetings never happened. If you look at the seating plan, it contains a number of names, also of celebrities, people who were fans, etc. It was a network, partly real, partly completely imaginary. And this is all very important. If you study the work of Ray Johnson, it's based basically on word play of names. So a name, an addressee, is always already on this person. And he loved the fact that so many celebrities had pseudonyms, etc. So it's a constant dispersal of the recipient and the addressee, etc. You never know if you're never anywhere with this.
But as an artist or an ambitious artist, did he want his work to be in the museum someday? Or was it completely uninterested?
I think he was very conflicted about it. He wanted that type of attention, and he did not want it. And if you read interviews with him, every interview is a way of not responding. There's a beautiful little book called "That Was the Answer," interviews with Ray Johnson, and basically, "That was the answer" is his way of saying when he's given a particular obtuse answer to a question.
How would you compare that with Warhol's not answering things?
It's very good.
Really? I think we'll just take one more question.
It's a comment, but also a question. Thierry reminded me of a story when he was exchanging Ray Johnson a piece with Christo, that he brought his way, probably. And there was a lapse of time when he received the piece. Christo called him up, said, "Did you receive my piece?" "Yes," and wrapped it. That's kind of so I think there is kind of a romanticism, intermedia, if you want to call it, because multimedia is something else. But I think a pure romanticism, because you totally forget the script of the traditional way of communicating. Is that correct? And you enter in another world, and it could become very emotional. In the case of Christo, he said, "Why do you do that?" He said, and it became a real kind of adversary. They were not on the same level of communication. I think it's kind of, there is some romanticism of that, I guess. But there was also one, Fagan Gary ordered a portrait, you probably know that. Fagan got a 20 portrait, and they agree on a certain amount of money. And in the meantime, there is a guy who came to the studio, he gave 2 portraits on the 19, and he said, I can't give you the 19 because I give 2 portraits to somebody else. But what I can do is reduce the price, and I spend less time on this painting, so it became so complicated. Fagan said, please, keep the painting, it's okay. No, it's no, we have a moral. So it became something that an artistic behavior, that it was like probably trying to find out how people react in certain situations. And that's a way of communicating, I guess. It's which have a tendency to be loose with telephone, people don't today. But, and I see that as Leonardo da Vinci might have the same with the Medicis. It was more important how to the process of doing things rather than finalizing something. So it's not Shakespeare as well. It's not something new. And I think that, but it's a beauty. I think there is some beauty in that totally. I mean, because it's you reach another level, spiritual level of communicating, understanding what your mind of the people and your own mind too at the same time, how you react in a situation. That's what I'm doing.
Well, that in fact, Da Vinci and the Renaissance, the text, I think, landed there. If anyone wants to ask, kind of